Good day to all our Sasbo members, Sasbo colleagues, and all who will be tuning in. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Salary Negotiation series on the Sasbo Round Table podcast. Today I have Mr. Myan Soobramoney, who is the AGS of Capitec, and he is here to discuss the recent salary settlement in Capitec, including the performance bonus, which in Capitec is referred to the short-term incentives. An interesting side note as well, Mr. Myan is the AGS for SBV and the South African Reserve Bank. Welcome, Myan.
Thank you, Keanu, for having me.
So, Myan, let's jump back to the beginning of the salary negotiations. What was the overall mood for the members while walking into these negotiations?
Yeah, Keanu, looking back, expectations were running quite high. As we all know that, cost of living really bites. And, going into negotiations, it basically shines a spotlight on those things that members would want to see improvements through, that the union should, try to assist with. And I suppose one always feels the weight of that pressure, going in. Can I also say that we also felt the burden of the fact that we've been in a low inflationary environment, or lower, let me say, relatively speaking. Last year's inflation figures came out at, almost 21-year low. So having that information in terms of the background and the preparation going into the negotiations, added to that sort of pressure that one was already feeling. But yeah.
What were the key expectations for members in the bank going into the process?
So members, as you know, are invited by the union to complete a salary survey before we get into the negotiations. And that's for us to assess what the feeling on the ground is and, what members' expectations are from the union going into the negotiations. And, as always, the expectation was Sasbo, go in and negotiate a better increase for me. And, one will also get, sort of other issues coming up, but I think that was the key message, if I recall.
And how important is it that members participate in this when it comes to achieving such good outcomes for them?
Very important question, Keanu. We can easily take the process for granted. And rule number one is that if there isn't members, then there isn't a union to sit around the table of negotiations. And I can't stress that enough. But second very important rule is that if we're going to the negotiations, it's always good that we know exactly what members want Sasbo to action in that process, what our mandate is, as it were, and that we act, in accordance with delivering on that expectation to the best of our ability.
And were there any tough moments or turning points during the negotiations that really stood out?
You'll recall that this year we went into a dispute with Capitec on both matters, the performance bonus negotiations as well as the salary negotiations. So that was not foreseen, it was not planned. One goes into the negotiations trying to get a good outcome and utilizing whatever resources we have in terms of pursuing that sort of outcome. But should it happen that in the negotiations things get tough, then one has to consider what one's rights are, what the options are, and then take it from there. So in this particular instance, we encountered difficulty in that the parties had reached a deadlock. So in essence, what it meant was that we had received the bank's final offer, and that meant that was the end point for the bank. With the union, we also had reached an end point in a sense that we could not move beyond the point that we had last tabled. So that resulted in us lodging a dispute and, following the dispute resolution provisions as per our recognition agreement.
And what would you say was the biggest win coming out of this agreement, after the dispute, after coming to a conclusion with the dispute and getting the best for our members?
Look, I suppose the biggest win for me, Keanu, would be that if our members are united and they speak with one voice, then it shows that we can really, influence the process to the betterment of members at the end of the day. That to me is the biggest win. But if I go to the practicality, one of the things that we have been fighting or trying to raise with the bank for many years about putting in place a bank overall minimum salary that we were previously unsuccessful on, this time around we were successful in. Look, it's a start. It's a step in the right direction. But at this present moment, what we've negotiated is a minimum salary of 15,000 rands for current employees. There are some exclusions that is subject to, but effective 1 May, that's what members in the bargain unit that are not there would enjoy.
And for members listening right now, what does this agreement mean for them practically?
Sure. Look, the practical aspect I always believe is more important than what the legalese in the collective agreement actually spells out. And let's look at the practicalities. Members are going to get obviously it's based on performance, a 5.37% salary increase against the current inflation rate, which is around 3%. That represents a 2.37% real increase. Members are also going to be experiencing a benefit in the healthcare allowance that goes up to 800 rands per month at the maximum cap, which is just over 10% increase. On the minimum side of things, there's a new change in there that members who move to Momentum Health for Me option 1, that they have the option of that being paid by the bank with no cost to themselves. I think that's a huge benefit. There's also other movements in the salary agreement. I just want to quickly move to the performance bonus negotiations. As a result of the union negotiating the headline earnings target for the basis of the scheme down by 1%, that translates into the target reducing by around 137 million. Effectively, depending on where one is, in terms of the different categories subject to the various criteria, one could be in receipt of a bonus that could be north of between 8 and 15% more than what would have otherwise been the case. So I think that's a good achievement overall.
Members a better understanding as to that it's not just about the salary increase, but also all those other things that gives us an opportunity to live a nice life, for lack of a better word. So what lessons did this round of negotiations teach you that will strengthen the future processes?
Keanu, that question really gets me thinking, because we're always going to the negotiations being prepared, well informed, etc. I think it's one of the things we pride ourselves in as the Sasbo negotiating team. But there would always be things that would be different, in terms of what the current negotiations holds compared to previous years. So one will always look out for those learning lessons. This time around, I would say it was not over until the dispute was resolved. So at every stage in the process, one continued to talk, even though talks were difficult. And that to me said that resilience, persistence, commitment in terms of the negotiating teams coming together to the table, together with leadership support and support from members on the ground. I think that to me was the lesson learned, is that if we come together, we speak with one voice, and we truly believe in what is on the table, at the end of the day, it can make a difference. Thanks, Keanu.
Continuously, improving. And also, just on that note, I also would like us to thank the entire negotiating team. I know there's a lot that goes into it, and also to our members on the ground who are constantly engaging, constantly asking the questions, and also getting our members to participate in this. Myan, lastly, if you could leave our members with one message about where things are heading next, in Sasbo, in finance, globally, what would that be?
Keanu, very important question. Members, it's very important that we don't take things for granted. The finance sector is changing. The world of work is changing. Every day we read new articles coming out about what AI has achieved, or what the possibilities through AI, hold for society, for the world, for the workplace. As the future is daunting and uncertain, it's very, very important that you remain a member of the union and you encourage your colleagues to belong to Sasbo. Because I believe that if the future is uncertain, we have a greater chance by navigating through that together. And, with support, with encouragement, and, having the kind of partner in your career that is really going to spell upliftment to you, support to you, and at the end of the day, enhancing your prosperity. Thanks, Keanu.
Thank you, Myan. Well, members, there you have it. You heard it first from our AGS, Mr. Myan Soobramoney. I'll see you guys next time on the Sasbo Round Table. Thank you.
Thanks, Keanu.